I gave them my heart. They gave me silence. And then they took the last piece of him I had left. You don't ever expect the people you raised, the ones you stayed up all night for, when they were sick, fed, when you were hungry, clothed, when your own clothes were falling apart, to one day turn around and treat you like some burden, or worse, like you don't matter at all. But here I am, just a grandmother, telling you the truth, because I know I'm not the only one. I was married for 43 years to the love of my life, George. A quiet man, kind, loyal. He didn't have a lot to say, but when he held my hand, when he slipped that modest gold ring on my finger all those years ago, I never questioned whether I was loved. That ring, it wasn't fancy. No big stone, just a simple band with our initials scratched inside G+E, forever. It was ours. I wore it every day. Through pregnancies, through loss, through laughter, through his sickness. And after he passed, it stayed on my finger, like a promise still being kept. But I should have known. Promises mean different things to different people. My daughter Rachel used to be so close to me. She was my only child, my miracle after 3 miscarriages. I gave her everything. And when she got older, I stepped in to help with her boys, my grandsons. Babysitting, cooking, staying late when she worked overtime. I didn't expect thanks. I did it out of love. But things started to shift after George died. Rachel started talking to me like I was a child. Decisions were made without me. "We're downsizing," she said. "We'll sell the house, and you'll come live with us. It'll be easier." I didn't argue. Maybe I should have. I didn't know easier for them meant harder for me. At her place, I didn't have a room, just a corner in the basement. "Temporary," she said. "You understand, right?" I understood all right. But I didn't complain. Not when they moved my things in plastic bins. Not when I noticed little things of mine disappearing, photo frames, trinkets. "Probably in storage," she said. "We'll sort it all later." But one day, I looked at my hand. My ring was gone. I froze. I searched the bin, the drawer, even inside the pillowcases. I looked for days, and then I heard the boys talking. Mom said it wasn't real gold anyway, the oldest one laughed. She sold it for gas money. I don't know what broke me more, the lie or the laugh. The last piece of George, sold without asking, without telling me, as if it meant nothing. And maybe to them, it didn't. But it was everything to me. I wasn't always the woman you see now, wrinkled, gray-haired, and weary from a lifetime of storms. No, once upon a time, I was a young bride with stars in my eyes and a gold band on my finger. That wedding ring, simple, elegant, engraved with our initials, wasn't just jewelry. It was my entire heart, my story, my vow. And for more than 50 years, I wore it through every joy and sorrow. You see, I gave everything to this family, every ounce of myself. I wasn't just a wife. I was a silent warrior, a nurse, a chef, a teacher, and sometimes even a punching bag for my husband's frustrations. I swallowed tears with smiles and stitched wounds no one else could see. I sacrificed dreams so that others could live theirs. I stayed when I could have run. I gave more than I had. My children. I raised them with trembling hands and fierce love. When they were sick, I stayed up all night. When they cried, I dried their tears. I skipped meals to feed them. I turned old dresses into costumes. I prayed over their pillows. I built a home out of thin air and bare hands. And still I asked for nothing but kindness in return. But kindness, it is a currency some never learn to spend. As the years passed and I aged, I noticed something changing. Not just in my body, but in their eyes. I became invisible, a burden, an obligation. They stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped caring unless they needed something. A babysitter, a loan, advice they'd never follow. And then, when my hands began to tremble too much to knit, and my feet too weak to stand long enough to cook, they moved me into the spare room, out of sight, out of mind. My belongings were slowly boxed, my opinions no longer asked for. My wedding dress, my scrapbooks, my old love letters, they all vanished piece by piece. They called it decluttering. And then came the day that broke me. I walked into the living room and I saw it. On the table, a tiny velvet box. Open. Empty. My ring, my wedding ring, was gone. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. My daughter didn't look up from her phone. "Oh," she said casually. "We sold it. You don't wear it anymore and we needed to fix the car." Just like that. No apology, no discussion, no consideration. That ring was the last thing your father gave me before he passed. It was the symbol of every moment we lived and survived together. And they sold it like a second-hand chair at a garage sale. I stared at her. At them. They didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't care. That night, I wept alone. Not because the ring was gone, but because I realized I was too. They didn't see me anymore. Not as a person, not as a mother, not as a woman with a life behind her. Just furniture in the corner. Just someone to tolerate until I was no longer there. But they were wrong, because something inside me snapped. Not like glass shattering, but like a door unlocking. And what came next? They never expected. I was cleaning out the linen closet when I noticed the small jewelry box on the top shelf was gone. My heart didn't race right away. I thought maybe I'd moved it. Or maybe one of the kids had helped themselves to the shelf and forgot to put it back. But when I asked Clara, she just shrugged. "Oh, that old thing, I thought you didn't wear any of that anymore." I blinked. "You saw it." "Saw it, I sold it, Mom. You never wore the stuff and, well, we needed some extra for the trip." That trip. That wretched weekend getaway to the coast where they left me behind with microwaved dinners and silence. I remember the photos they posted smiling at seafood restaurants splashing on the beach, while I sat by the window alone wondering if they would even call. But now I knew what funded that trip. My wedding ring. The gold band my husband gave me when we had nothing but dreams. The ring that carried 42 years of promises, tears, laughter, and silence. Gone. Just gone. She didn't ask. She didn't even hesitate. And when I looked into her eyes that evening, she didn't see anything wrong. She saw me as old, forgetful, detached from material things. But that ring was never just a thing. It was the last piece of him I had, and she sold it like a pawn shop trinket. I didn't speak a word after that. I simply nodded, walked back to my room. And in that stillness, I felt something shatter. Not the ring, but my place in this home. I had become invisible. And they would soon learn invisible doesn't mean powerless. After that night, I stopped speaking unless necessary. They thought I was sulking, maybe even pouting like a child who had lost a toy. But I wasn't. I was observing, listening, measuring the distance between what they said and what they actually meant. You see, silence has a way of making people reveal themselves. When I stopped reacting, they stopped pretending. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way Clara counted my pills like they were inventory. The way David flinched every time a letter arrived from the bank. The way they laughed a little too easily when they thought I couldn't hear. I didn't confront them. I just watched. They had taken the ring. What else had they taken? One morning, while Clara was out and the house was quiet, I opened the drawer in her office desk. I knew I shouldn't have, but my heart told me something was off. Inside, I found a folder, my name printed in bold letters across the top. Inside were documents, my account balances, copies of my signature, and pages of transfers I never approved. They weren't just selling memories. They were draining my future. They had forged my trust, literally. I felt the room spin. My legs trembled beneath me. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I simply closed the folder gently, like it might shatter if I wasn't careful. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft, abuse, disrespect so deep it disguised itself as love. But I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. Instead, I brewed tea, sat on the porch, smiled when they got home. Because if they thought I was too old, too quiet, too weak to fight back, they were about to learn that sometimes silence is not surrender. It's strategy. They didn't even bother to hide it. That morning, I went to my little cabinet, the same wooden one I'd had since my 20s, chipped at the corners, velvet-lined inside, and opened the small drawer where I always kept my wedding ring. I opened it with a soft, trembling expectation like I had for years. I wasn't planning to wear it that day, no. I just liked to check that it was still there. Like checking your heartbeat. A quiet ritual of love. But this time, the box was empty, gone. My heart dropped. I stared at the little velvet cushion like it had betrayed me. I blinked, hoping my eyes were wrong. That maybe it had rolled over, maybe it had gotten caught in the side lining like it did once when I was younger and panicked the same way. But no, the slot was naked, silent. I froze there for a long time, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 10 minutes. Time collapsed. Then I started checking every drawer, every shelf, every corner of that little cabinet. I even went to my dresser. I opened boxes I hadn't touched in years. I looked behind picture frames under my bed in the laundry basket. I tore through everything like a woman possessed. And that's when I realized something deeper than the missing ring. It wasn't misplaced. It was taken. How did I know? Because I remembered exactly where I had last seen it. Last Thursday, right before my grandson's birthday dinner. I had opened the box and looked at it lovingly. I even whispered, "He would have loved to see you today, Paul." I closed the lid carefully and smiled through the ache. Then I left for dinner. That ring had been in there for 52 years. It didn't vanish. It didn't walk away. And then I heard something in my head. I didn't want to hear my daughter-in-law's voice from the hallway 2 nights before, whispering to my son, sharp and hushed, "We could get at least $2,000 for that ring. She's not going to wear it anymore." My blood turned to ice. I had brushed it off. Thought maybe I misunderstood. I hadn't. Confrontation or cowardice. I wanted to scream, cry, demand, slam my hands on the table and yell, "How dare you?" But I didn't. I sat down, slowly, on the edge of my bed, and I cried like I hadn't cried since Paul died. Not because of the value of the ring. Not even because of the betrayal, though that cut deep. I cried because of what it meant. They didn't see it as a symbol. They saw it as a transaction. That ring wasn't just gold. It was memory. It was the trembling hands of a young man sliding it onto my finger under the spring sun. It was the vows, the storms, the children, the fights, the forgiveness, the hospital visits, the waiting room prayers. They sold all of that for $2,000. I sat in silence, but not in defeat. I didn't speak to anyone that day. I made my tea. I folded laundry. I listened to the birds. I acted like everything was fine, but inside, something changed. The silence that used to comfort me now grew loud, sharp. It whispered, "They don't respect you anymore. They don't see you. You're just old, just someone to use." I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. But I would not forget. I was not powerless. That day I began my quiet preparation. They had sold my wedding ring. Now it was time I started reclaiming everything else they thought they could take without asking. The day after I discovered the ring was gone, I woke up to a strange silence. Not the usual soft morning quiet, but the kind that feels heavy. Like something is watching. Like your soul is being weighed. I made my tea, sat in the old rocker by the window, and looked outside at the garden I once tended with Paul. The roses were overgrown now. The weeds were bolder. and yet somehow the morning sunlight still fell with grace. And that's when I heard him. Not with my ears, but in the kind of way only a widow understands. You were always stronger than you thought, Nora. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't grief. It was memory speaking through love. His voice echoed in my bones like a promise he had once made the night I miscarried our second baby. The world might take from you, Nora, but don't ever let it take you. They took my ring, but they wouldn't take me. The first step, gathering my thoughts. That morning, I made a list. Not a list of revenge. No, I'm too old and too tired for bitterness. But a list of what I still had. My name, my stories, my dignity, my bank account, what was left of it, and one remaining diamond earring that they must have missed. I hid that earring in the toe of a worn-out slipper. I smiled while doing it. I felt like a teenager sneaking out for the first time. Then I opened my old notebook, the one I used to write letters in after Paul passed. That's when I wrote the first sentence that would change everything. Today, I start saving myself. They didn't notice a thing. You'd think they would have sensed something had shifted. That maybe I looked them in the eye a little longer. That maybe I no longer asked how their day was. That maybe I didn't laugh at the shallow jokes at the dinner table. But no, they were too busy. Too busy buying new shoes. Too busy planning their weekend getaway. Too busy to notice the old woman at the window watching, remembering, and preparing. That night, I went to bed and didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. I felt something else, clarity. A whisper from the past. As I lay in bed, hands folded across my stomach like I was praying with no words, I thought about the little church in the mountains where Paul and I had gotten married. We were poor then. The ring wasn't worth much. But oh, the love. Priceless. I remembered how after our wedding, we shared one bottle of apple cider and danced barefoot on the porch until midnight. And I whispered to the dark, "You're still mine, Paul, even if the gold is gone." I could almost feel his hand over mine. And then, like a hush falling over the room, I heard another echo in my heart. "Start with your story, Nora. That's the one thing no one can sell." So I picked up my notebook and I began writing, not just to remember, but to awaken. The first entry I wrote in that old notebook was raw. I didn't try to be poetic. I didn't worry about spelling or sentence structure. I just let the truth bleed onto the page. They sold my wedding ring without asking, but they didn't steal my memory of the day he gave it to me. I wrote for hours, every story, every memory, every secret I had held for decades. I wrote about the day Paul built our first kitchen table with his bare hands. I wrote about the miscarriage I had kept to myself. About the time I hid money in coffee tins so we could buy our son a bicycle. About the loneliness I began to feel long before I was old. I wrote about how invisible I'd become in this house, how they talked around me, over me, through me. And then I wrote this: "One day they will look for me not for what I can give, but for what I meant. And maybe then they'll understand." The visit that said too much. 2 days after I started writing, my daughter-in-law came into my room without knocking. She never used to do that. "Hey," she said, "fake sweet. We're thinking of redecorating the living room. Maybe sell some of your older furniture, to freshen up the space." I stared at her. That chair, Paul built it. That cabinet held every birthday card I'd ever received. That lamp, the last gift from my sister before she passed. But to her, they were just old things. I said nothing. I only smiled. "You okay, Nora?" she asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely curious. I wanted to say, "I'm more than okay. I'm awakening." But I just nodded. She left satisfied. The plan in motion. That night, I made my first phone call in secret. It wasn't to a lawyer. It was to Claire, my best friend from the church, who now ran a small support group for elderly women who had been mistreated or forgotten by their families. We hadn't spoken in months. Life had drifted us apart. But when she picked up and heard my voice, she gasped. "Nora, is everything okay?" I didn't answer that question. I just said, "I think I'm ready to do something, but I don't know where to start." She said, "Then let's begin together." What they never understood. You see, the ones who forget you always assume you've forgotten yourself too. They think silence means surrender. They think age means weakness. They think grief makes you easy to manipulate. But what they don't know is that silence can also be strategy. That pain, when written down, becomes record. That when a woman writes her own story, she begins to reclaim her name. They sold my wedding ring without asking, but they gave me back something they never meant to. My voice. And I was about to use it. Claire and I met 2 days later at the park, not the church, not her house, and definitely not mine. Too many listening ears in my home these days. It was a clear afternoon, the kind Paul would have said was perfect for picking tomatoes. Claire wore the same purple scarf she always wore when she was nervous. I knew she didn't want to alarm me, but the way her hand gripped her teacup told me she already suspected the truth ran deeper than I let on. "Tell me everything," she said softly. So I did. I told her about the ring, the whispers in the hallway, the furniture, the silence at dinner, the way they had slowly turned me from mother to nuisance, from grandma to burden. And she just listened. No interruptions, no advice. Only when I finished, eyes watery but dry, did she say the words that made my back straighten. "Then it's time you made your exit, Nora. On your terms. The escape blueprint." We didn't call it escape at first, but that's what it was. Claire told me about a small apartment complex she helped sponsor, quiet, safe, affordable. It was for elderly women who'd been displaced or emotionally abandoned. A place where you could start over without shame. The catch. There were only 2 rooms available, and one would be gone by the end of the month. I had to act fast, but carefully. Back at home. The final straw. That night, something happened that snapped the last fragile thread of my tolerance. My grandson, sweet as he could be when he wanted to, walked into my room with his phone in hand. "Mom said to ask if you still need that cabinet in the hallway. She wants to put her mirror there." I didn't answer right away. Because, you see, that wasn't a cabinet. That was Paul's memory chest. The one we built together. The one that held our wedding photos, his war medals, and a pressed rose from our honeymoon. "Tell your mother I'll be keeping it," I said with a calm so sharp it could cut steel. He shrugged and walked off. Not even a thank you. And that was it. I wasn't just leaving anymore. I was reclaiming myself. The night I started packing. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I pulled out a suitcase I hadn't used in years. I opened the old closet and started choosing. Not what they'd expect. Not fancy dresses or jewelry. There wasn't much left anyway. I packed my Bible, Paul's handkerchief, the photograph of us in front of our first home, my notebook, a letter I wrote for each of them, not out of anger, but out of finality. And that diamond earring I had hidden in the slipper, that too. Not because I needed to sell it, but because it reminded me they don't get to decide what's valuable anymore. The house was silent when I slipped the envelopes under their bedroom doors. I didn't write to make them feel guilty. I wrote because I needed to leave free. Each letter was different, honest, firm, but never cruel. To my son I wrote, "You were once a boy who brought me dandelions. You grew into a man I barely recognize. I gave you my youth, my love, and my trust. You sold the last symbol of my marriage without asking. That hurt more than you'll ever understand. I forgive you, but I can no longer live in a house where I am treated like furniture." To my daughter-in-law I wrote, "I see you, the mother, the wife, the woman who never quite saw me. I hope one day you understand that an old woman is not a burden, but a library, and you never even opened the first page." To my grandson I wrote, "There is still time for you. Don't let the silence between us grow into ignorance. Ask questions. Listen to stories. Respect where you come from, or one day you'll wonder where you lost your roots." The last morning in that house. At sunrise, I made my tea one last time. I sat in the rocker, watched the light shift on the floorboards. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled small and real. Claire arrived right on time. She pulled up quietly. I loaded my modest suitcase into the back seat myself. No one woke up. No one noticed, and I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. A new door, a new name. The apartment wasn't grand. The walls were plain, the furniture minimal. But when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ownership. Every object in that room belonged to me. Every decision was mine. I poured myself a cup of coffee with trembling hands, sat on the small sofa, and breathed. This wasn't just freedom from a house. It was a rebirth. They called. Eventually, 3 days passed. Then the phone rang. First my son, then my grandson, then my daughter-in-law. Voicemails only. Polite at first, then panicked. Where are you? We're worried, Mom. Please call us back. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I was learning the art of sacred silence. Let them sit in the echo of my absence. Let them feel the shape of what they had discarded. Let them understand what it meant when someone chooses herself for the first time in decades. I didn't respond. Not to the first call. Not to the second voicemail, the third text, or the urgent message left by my grandson on my church friend's Facebook page. I sat in my chair by the window of my new apartment, sunlight gently warming my hands, and I held the silence like a soft animal in my lap. Because for years I had begged with words. I had pleaded with glances. I had hoped in quiet. Now I was letting the absence of my voice speak for me. And oh, how it roared. What they wanted, and what I needed. 3 days after their messages, a delivery arrived. A bouquet of roses, red, white, and yellow. No note, just my name on the envelope. I knew what it meant. They thought they could fix it with flowers. They thought guilt could be softened with gestures. But the wound wasn't about a ring. It wasn't even about furniture or being overlooked. It was about respect, about acknowledgement. And once that breaks, it takes more than petals to restore. Claire's words like lanterns. That evening, Claire came over with tea and lemon cake. She always knew when I was slipping into memory. Still no reply, she asked, nodding toward the phone on my table. Still silence, I said, and I think I'm okay with it. She smiled proud. Then she looked me in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. You don't need their validation to prove your worth. You already existed before their opinions. You were a woman before you were a mother. You were Nora before they learned your name. I cried, not the tears of sorrow, but of release. What I did with the diamond earring. That evening, I took out the single diamond earring I had hidden all that time. I held it in my palm. It sparkled quietly, honestly, just like I had for years. And then I made a decision. The next morning, I walked to the small jewelry shop at the corner of the street. Not a chain, a real one run by a kind older couple who reminded me of us. I sold it, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to let go. To say this is no longer the only thing I have left of him. Because I now had something even more precious, myself. The day after I sold the earring, I bought something simple. A small notebook with a floral cover. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And in it, I began to write again, not just my story, but my new story. No longer as the woman whose family sold her wedding ring, but as the woman who found herself again in the quietest corner of the world. I titled the first page, Nora Unedited. It felt like the first time I had said my name with pride in years. They finally showed up. They came to the new apartment. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson. I don't know how they found me. Maybe Claire told them, maybe they figured it out. But there they were, standing outside the building, clutching a bag of groceries and a bouquet of guilt. Claire knocked first. Nora, they're here. I stood at the door, breathing in deeply, not with fear, but with boundaries. The conversation at the threshold, I didn't invite them in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me gently. That little click, it wasn't just a latch, it was a line. We didn't mean to hurt you, Mom, my son said first. His eyes bloodshot. We thought you didn't care about the ring anymore, my daughter-in-law mumbled, not meeting my gaze. And my grandson. He just stared at the ground, embarrassed, clutching the handles of a grocery bag like they were the last thread holding him to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, it's not about the ring. It's about not being asked, not being seen, not being treated like I matter. There was silence, a real one. Heavy, honest. I left them with one thought. I wasn't angry anymore. That had passed. But I was clear. You don't get to choose how I heal. And you don't get to ask for forgiveness without first understanding what was broken. I looked each of them in the eye. And then I added, you may have sold my ring, but you no longer own my peace. And with that, I turned and walked back inside. The door closed behind me, firm, steady, free. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't ache. That's what I felt that evening after I closed the door on the people I once thought I couldn't live without. It wasn't loneliness. It was clarity. For the first time in decades, I was in a space that reflected me, not a version of me that was useful to someone else. Not the quiet grandma who stayed out of the way, but the full, breathing woman I had buried under decades of self-sacrifice. I made soup. I lit a candle. I played an old record Paul once loved, and I danced barefoot in my small kitchen. A visit from the past. The next day, I received a letter. An actual handwritten letter, something rare in this world of texts and voicemails. It was from Mrs. Alden, an old neighbor from when Paul and I lived in our first house. She'd heard through the grapevine that I'd moved on and wanted to tell me something. I remember how you used to sing while hanging laundry, Nora. You made the street feel lighter. Whatever you're going through, don't forget you were always the sunshine. I folded the letter and held it to my heart. Isn't it funny? Sometimes it's the people you don't expect who remember you most truly. Rediscovering old treasures. Later that week, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old Polaroids. Me and Paul at the lake? The boys when they were still small enough to carry. A photo of me alone laughing in a red dress. And in that moment, I didn't feel grief. I felt thankful. Because for all the things they'd taken from me, they couldn't take the life I had truly lived. They couldn't take the woman I had been before. Time made me quieter. Before age made me smaller in their eyes. Before they forgot. And now I remembered. A new purpose emerges. Claire and I met again at our usual cafe. She brought with her a flyer, something I hadn't expected. There's a new community program, she said. Story circles for older women. You can read from your notebook. People need to hear it. I hesitated. What if no one listens? She leaned in and whispered, then speak louder. I laughed, a real open laugh that startled even me. That night I signed up, not to be heard by others, but to hear myself again. Because this story of mine, it's just beginning. The first time I read from my notebook, my hands trembled. There were about 12 women in the room, some with canes, some with scarves wrapped tight around thinning hair, others holding cups of tea like lifelines. Each of them had something behind their eyes, a story that hadn't been heard. I stood feeling both small and powerful and began. They sold my wedding ring without asking. A few gasps. One woman nodded slowly. Another wiped her eyes without shame. I kept reading about Paul, about the silence, about the day I packed my suitcase at midnight. And when I finished, the room didn't clap. They stood, not out of pity, but out of recognition. After the circle, quiet conversations. One woman approached me afterward. Her name was Bernice. My son sold my house while I was recovering in the hospital, she said, voice brittle. Said it was for my own good. I didn't fight it. But I haven't slept since. She looked at me like I was more than just a woman with a story. Like I was a mirror. We talked for an hour. And for the first time, I saw what this journey had really given me. Not just freedom, but permission for others to begin their own. The ripple effect. The next week, the group grew. Word had spread. Women from neighboring towns came. Some brought journals, others just pain and memory. We shared not just stories, but survival. My daughter controls all my money. They call me crazy because I still talk to my late husband. They told me I'd be better off in a facility. Over and over, I heard echoes of myself, but also sparks of resistance. And I realized I wasn't just healing, I was leading. A new title, not grandma, not widow. That evening, Claire called me something different. You're becoming an elder, she said. Haven't I always been old, I joked. Not old, she smiled. An elder. A woman whose story doesn't just end, it guides. That word sat with me long after I hung up the phone. It felt bigger than my pain, bigger than my past. It felt like a beginning. The girl who had once danced barefoot in a red dress was returning. Only this time she was dancing with purpose, and her steps were guiding others home. It started with a comment. One of the women from our story circle had filmed me reading aloud during a session and uploaded it to a small online support forum. Nothing fancy, just my voice, my words, my truth. The video somehow made its way onto a larger platform. And then, my grandson found it. "Grandma, is this really you?" He sent me a message. The first one in weeks. "Grandma, I saw the video. Is this really you? I didn't know you felt that way." He wasn't angry. He was stunned, and maybe for the first time in his young life, ashamed, not in a way that hardens, but in the way that softens a person. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went for a walk in the park, letting the breeze settle the sudden swell in my chest. I wasn't sure if I should feel exposed or seen. My response to him. That night, I wrote him a letter, a real one, folded it gently, and mailed it to his apartment. Here's what I wrote. "Yes, it's me. And yes, I felt those things silently for far too long. I don't blame you, sweetheart. Not fully. But I need you to know silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's just a bruise that's learned how to sit still. I hope you'll grow to be a man who asks, who listens, who notices. That's all I ever wanted from any of you. I love you. I always will. Grandma Nora." What happened next surprised me. A week later, he showed up to one of our story circle meetings. He stood at the back quiet. No camera, no phone. Just a young man with listening eyes. When it was over, he came up to me and hugged me. Tight, long, real. He didn't apologize, not in words. But in that hug, I felt it all. "Can I come again next week?" he asked, voice soft. "Only if you bring cookies?" I replied with a smile. We both laughed. Something had shifted. Not everything was fixed, but something was starting. A ring, a story, and something bigger. You know what's funny? I don't even think about the ring anymore. Not like I used to. Because now I have something greater than gold. I have my voice. I have my truth. And I have a grandson learning how to honor the woman who raised his father. It's been almost a year now. The apartment still smells faintly of lavender and lemon, 2 scents that have come to define my new chapter. The notebooks have multiplied. My little bookshelf is full of stories written not just by me, but by the women who came after. Women who once sat silently in corners, now sharing their truth aloud with trembling courage. And me, I've become something I never imagined. Whole. An unexpected gift. On my birthday, my grandson came by with a small box. He handed it to me with eyes unsure but hopeful. Inside was a ring. Not the one they sold. This one was simple, sterling silver, a small, humble stone in the center. "It's not to replace anything," he said, "just to honor you. I want you to have something from me this time." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just held the ring in my palm and nodded. Then I slid it onto my finger, not because I needed it, but because I chose it. That made all the difference. The final story circle. At our last meeting before the holidays, I stood in front of a now full room, dozens of women, a few granddaughters, even 2 men. And I read one final passage from my first notebook. They sold my wedding ring without asking. But in doing so, they awakened something they never expected. A fire, a voice, a woman who had been waiting to remember herself. And now I do. The room fell silent. And then a standing ovation, not because the story was unique, but because it was theirs too. Legacy reclaimed. My story, once hidden in sighs and silence, is now being passed down. Not just in circles, but in libraries, in podcasts, in quiet bedtime readings from granddaughter to grandmother. And I know this for certain. What they took from me, they never truly owned. What I gave myself, they could never steal. Because healing is louder than theft. Because love, real love, cannot be melted down or pawned. It lives in memory, in voice, in a room full of women who finally realize we were never just someone's something. We were and still are. Everything.